Historical Society and want to welcome you if you're just joining us for our first West Hartford Community Conversations. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We'll give people just a couple more minutes to check in, but you're in the right place. Thanks so much for joining us. Hi, everyone. If you're just joining us, you're here for the West Hartford Community Conversations. We'll be getting started in just a minute or two, giving people a chance to log in, but we'll be starting shortly. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Mitos. I'm the Executive Director of the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society, and I want to welcome you to West Hartford Community Conversations. At this time, I think we've waited a couple minutes. Hopefully everyone has joined us, and I'd like to turn it over to the Mayor of West Hartford, Ms. Sherry Cantor.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it very much. I am Mayor Sherry Cantor. Welcome to our first of a series of West Hartford Community Conversations. I'm so glad that you have joined us here this evening. I want to start by thanking West Hartford Community Interactive for hosting this Zoom webinar. As communities across the country face enormous challenges of racial and social injustice, health crisis, economic crisis, serious threats to our environment, and more, it is critically important for us to come together to discuss these issues, to connect and truly listen to each other. If we understand our history, we might better understand the challenges we currently face so we can better determine our future and who we want to be. This first conversation was scheduled for August 4th, but it being 2020, it was postponed due to Storm Isaias. I am sorry it has taken so much time to bring us together on this first topic, which is the role of policing in our community. My thanks to our panelists, West Hartford Police Chief Vernon Riddick, State Representative Steve Stafstrom, House Chair of the Judiciary Committee, and several community members that share their own experiences on the topic of policing. I would like to thank the committee members that have been working on this session for quite a while. Carol Blanks, Town Councilor and Chair of the Council's Public Safety Committee, and also past Chair of the West Hartford Board of Education. Rosina Haskins, Director of Equity Advancement for West Hartford Public Schools. Lorna Thomas Farquharson, Vice Chair of the West Hartford Board of Education. Tracy Wilson, West Hartford Town Historian and Co-Director of the Witness Stone Project for West Hartford. Earl Exum, our MC for this evening, and President of West Hartford African American Social and Cultural Organization. And finally, I would like to thank Jennifer DeColomatos for her commitment, enthusiasm, and work to coordinate this webinar through the hurdles of a massive storm and pandemic. Jen is the Director of the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society. We hope that you will find this series a way to give our current day challenges and historical context and share ideas safely, openly, and respectfully to create a more connected community, one that is fair and just, equitable and enlightened, empowering all of us to generate ideas and action steps that will strengthen our community. Jen, take it away. Jen, I think you might be on mute.
Yes, you're right. Thank you. Thank you for those kind words, Mayor Cantor, and thank you for really organizing the committee to come up with this, what we hope will be a series of community conversations. We all really believe that we're stronger together and that it's as a town that we can really make a difference. And so I'm just thrilled on behalf of the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society to be able to offer this program for the community. We think of ourselves as kind of the landmark in West Hartford, and definitely a place where people have gathered for many, many years. And while we can't gather in person this year, we can certainly gather in spirit and virtually. So it's a pleasure to host this tonight. And I also want to thank Jennifer Evans from West Hartford Community Interactive, who was instrumental in making this webinar possible. It is my real pleasure to introduce Earl Exum, who is the president of the West Hartford African American Social and Cultural Organization. The Noah Webster House and WASCO have been working together for years and years, and in the last few years we've been collaborating on community conversations. In 2019, we did a conversation together about Black History Month and what that really means. Where did it start from, and what does it mean to us today? And then actually, it seems like an eon ago, but just February of 2020, we hosted another event together talking about the 1619 project, and that was just before the pandemic got started. So it's just such a pleasure to be working with WASCO again, with Mayor Cantor, and with this committee, and we hope this will be the first of many conversations. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Earl Exum. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. It's just super exciting to be here. I mean, I think Mayor Cantor described that we really have been after this for a long time, and so excited that it's about to happen. West Hartford is just such a community where we can have these kind of thoughtful conversations. And I would like us to continue to be at the forefront of these kind of thoughtful conversations. And I think it's been mentioned before, we intend to have many more of these. And I just think it makes us a better and a stronger and a more informed community. For some housekeeping, I want everyone to know, participants, in the lower part, if you've used Zoom before, you often see in the lower part of your screen something that says chat. You won't see that here, but what you will see is something that says Q&A. If you have a question, please type in your question, and we will try to gather those up, and we'll offer those questions to our panelists for their thoughts. All right, and with that, I will introduce our panelists. So we're very excited today to have Representative Stephen Stafstrom. Sorry for that. Let's see, I'm going to pull up his bio right now. A minute, sorry. All right. Steve Stafstrom represents the Bridgeport neighborhoods of Black Rock, Brooklawn, and the West End. He was first elected to the General Assembly in 2015 during a special election. He currently serves as House Chairman of the Judiciary Committee and also serves on the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding and Planning and Development Committees. We're excited that Representative Stafstrom has joined us because as the head of the Judiciary Committee, he played an active role in recent legislation that is related to police accountability. So very excited to have you, and thank you for joining. Next, I would like to introduce our Chief of Police, and of course that also disappeared on me. But our Chief of Police is Vernon Riddick. Vernon Riddick became our Chief of Police in 2018 after a 24-year career as the chief of, that concluded as being chief of police for Waterbury, Connecticut. In that role, he was the first African-American chief of police, and also for West Hartford, he's the first African-American chief of police. So we're very excited also to have Chief Vernon Riddick. So to start off, I'd like to have each of them share some words with us, and then brief words, and then we will start with our first video from the community. The format will be, we'll show a video with some information and perspective from a community member. Then we'll have some our panelists speak to that. Then another video, and the same thing until the end. So we'll have 3 videos with 2 interludes where we hear the perspective of our panelists. So with that, Chief Riddick, just a quick word of introduction.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the exchange and the dialogue, and I look forward to some very exciting questions. And I thank you for the time. Representative Stafstrom, good to see you again. And Madam Mayor, nice outfit as usual.
All right, and Representative Stafstrom.
So I certainly appreciate the invite and the opportunity to join with you today. It's great to be on again with Chief Riddick, who I have certainly the utmost respect for, and certainly has a long and distinguished career, and you folks are lucky to have in West Hartford. Chief, if you get bored and you want to come down to Bridgeport, let me know. We could use somebody down here, but no, I'm just kidding. Not really, but anyway, I do appreciate this opportunity and want to echo the words before, that it is important to have this dialogue and bring the community together to engage in these discussions. So looking forward to it.
All right, thank you very much. And before we start the first video, Jen, I did want to let people know that they are, I guess our first question was, is the audience muted and off camera? And the answer is yes, you are muted and you are off camera. All right, and with that, we'll turn it over to the first video. Or audio, I should say.
Why don't I hear it?
While we're waiting to get it loaded, Dr. Lynn Thomas has been a longtime community member and a member of West Hartford African American Social and Cultural Organization. And she came forward with a story of her own, and as it relates to the West Hartford Police. So hopefully we can get her audio loaded here in a second. This worked perfectly earlier. Jen Evans, I do have the audio available if you want me to try it.
Yes, why don't you give it a go?
Okay.
This is Dr. Lynn Hayes Thomas.
There you go.
It's July 14th, 2020. My encounter with a West Hartford police officer occurred somewhere between 2002 and 2004. I was on my way home. At the time, I lived on Tanglewood Drive, just off of King Philip Drive. I was on King Philip Drive, headed north and approaching the middle school. I was stopped by a police officer and pulled over. I handed him my license and registration, and he went back to his squad car. After some time, he brought them back to me and said I was free to go. I asked him why I had been stopped, and he said that my emissions inspection sticker was in the wrong location. Now, just like everyone else, I went to a licensed and authorized inspection station and had the service performed. They put the inspection sticker in the window. As far as I could tell, it was in the same location on the windshield that everyone else's was. So this was a contrived reason to stop me. I think that this was due to the fact that my son also drove my car, and talking to him, I've discovered that he was stopped multiple times by the police.
All right, that's the end of Dr. Lynn Thomas's statement.
All right. All right. So, this is an incident that may be representative, maybe not, but Chief Riddick, I'd be interested in your perspective on just reflecting on Dr. Thomas's experience and the perspective she brings to it.
Well, Earl, you put me in a difficult situation because there really isn't a lot of information for me to comment on. What I glean from it is a motor vehicle stop occurred. It appears that the officers saw a violation with the emission sticker regarding the location. If you guys remember, I mean, that was many, many moons ago. We used to have the emission stickers on the front left of the windshield looking out. And one problem that we were having way back then from my previous job that I recall is people would sell these in the street themselves to people and not actually go through the emissions process. And one way to determine that would be the location on the windshield. But again, I don't have a lot of information to go on what occurred with the doctor. If her son was stopped numerous times, that information should have been in the computer system even back then, although it was antiquated, and he could have availed himself of the complaint process. I would be curious, if he was stopped so many times, was he ever issued a ticket? If so, how many times? Was he given verbal warnings? Was he provided any type of explanation that occurred? Was it rude treatment? And who did he express these concerns to? Here we are in 2020. And I just curious if anybody knew what was going on. And it's hard to correct something if you don't know about it. And maybe the doctor did present this to the police department at that time. I'm not sure, but those are some of the questions I have at the top of my head.
Yeah, that's fair, Chief Riddick. I guess the implication in her comments and the insinuation is that, and she used the words, she believes that it was a contrived reason. I guess the question is that an unlikely scenario that it was a contrived reason, or is it something that she should be concerned about? I guess how would we address that to her?
Those of you who've heard me speak before, I don't dodge questions, and I'm deliberately not trying to be evasive, but there really isn't enough for me to, if that was her feeling, who am I to dispute what her feelings were? I can't dispute that. A person's feelings are what a person's feelings are. Without having more information, specifically, I think her concerns dealt with the fact that her son was also stopped numerous times. So I'd have to get some information regarding that. If we go under the assumption that it was contrived, then obviously that's illegal. It could have been profiling. It could have been quote unquote fishing for something else. I just need more information, and it could have been a legitimate reason that they were pulled over. So I think all of those are on the table. All of those are viable options, but to come to a conclusion at this time or to provide some better insight, I'm just unable to do that with information provided.
Okay, understood. Thank you, Chief Ray.
Earl, if I may add in a little background information, which we did receive from Dr. Thomas, and she had mentioned that she shared the car with her son. So we do actually have a written description of his memory of what happened. And it was actually when he was a student at Hall High School. He had friends that lived across town. And after school one day, he had dropped off a few of them and was headed back with one last friend who also happened to be Black, who lived near him. And on the way home, they were stopped by a police officer. He asked the reason why they were stopped, and the officer said it was because he smelled marijuana. Now, Mr. Thomas thought that was strange because, first of all, they hadn't and weren't smoking marijuana, and he questioned how he could have smelled that from his, how the officer could have smelled it from his own car. But at any rate, they were handcuffed and sat on the curb while people passed them by. The police searched the entire car and then let them go because they didn't find anything. And this was a very upsetting incident to Mr. Thomas. And then again, not long afterwards, he would be driving his friends around town. One day after school, he pulled up in front of a building with a friend to wait for the others, wait for his other friends. And while they were there, they were just talking to friends, playing music, and hanging out. A police officer pulled behind them. And again, Mr. Thomas asked the reason, and they said it was because they were suspected of selling drugs. The students were handcuffed and actually put in the police cars while the police searched Mr. Thomas's car. And this was actually at the Hall High School. This was in front of school buses, students, faculty, and staff at a predominantly white school, which you can imagine caused Mr. Thomas to be quite embarrassed and angry, and the police found nothing and let them go. So I believe those are the two incidences that Dr. Thomas was talking about in terms of her son and the car.
Chief Riddick, I don't know if that gives you anything else to comment on.
I'll take a stab at it. Obviously, I think we all on this call would question if someone's driving, you're driving by, I don't know, was it the winter time? Was it the summertime that they can smell marijuana driving by? That's pretty strong nose. I think we'd agree with that if that were the case. So that could have been a contrived reason to pull somebody over. I don't know. If it was a summertime, and I think we've all driven past cars with people who were smoking marijuana, and you can very easily smell it. So that could have been a reason. As far as a vehicle search, there's clear statute regarding that. There's one thing if you're doing a pat down, a quick pat down for weapons, if you have a reason, if there's furtive movement or something else. But an outright search, you need probable cause for that. And I don't know if that was established or not. It does not, and the depiction that was provided, it does not appear that that's the case, but I think we all understand there's two sides to every story. All I'm getting is one right now. And so that's the best that I can provide. My question would be, was it reported to the police department? And if so, what occurred?
All right. Thank you, Chief Riddick. I think I'd like to turn it over to Representative Stafstrom. Knowing that you're on the Judiciary Committee, is there any information or insights that you glean from your role that would suggest that just overall in the state of Connecticut, there may be something systemic rather than these just being a couple of anecdotal stories? And to Chief Riddick's point, just one perspective. Is there a broader perspective across Connecticut that there perhaps is something systemic associated with these types of stops, if not these particular stops?
Yeah, thanks, Earl. And you raised, this instance, or at least feeling of it, raises a number of issues. First, any of us who've been pulled over by a police officer, and I can admit I have on a couple of occasions, it's intimidating. It's scary. Your heart starts racing as soon as you see those blue and red lights go on. And I'm a white male, so I can only imagine what someone who's not a white thinks. It's also embarrassing. You're sitting on the side of the road, especially with this young man handcuffed in, sitting on a curb where other people are driving by, especially in a community like a West Hartford where, folks know each other. They recognize cars, they recognize license plates. We as a state, I think, need to be very cognizant about why we pull people over and why we allow our police department to pull people over and for what. Because just that mere act of pulling someone over, I mean, that may be what a police officer does on a day in, day out basis. It's routine for them, but it's certainly not routine for the person being pulled over, and has some unintended consequences. So I think we need to take a very hard look. And in fact, in the legislation we passed this summer, we required the Police Accountability Task Force that has been meeting to take a real hard look at, are there certain things on the books that we should not be pulling people over for? Maybe there's still, an infraction or a misdemeanor offense or whatever, but they should only be secondary offenses and not a reason for a police officer to pull someone over, regardless of their skin color. Something like an admission sticker in a wrong place or a broken tail light. Is this really the kind of thing we want police spending their time and resources on pulling someone over for? I mean, the average traffic stop, takes a period of time to do. Is there a better use of that officer's 8-hour shift than, spending half an hour with someone for a broken taillight? I would argue, yes, there absolutely is. And if there's a community in the state that has enough officers that they can do that on a routine basis, there certainly are other communities in the state where they don't have those resources or that time or that manpower. And we should be thinking about that and what that costs in terms of both tax dollars and in terms of certainly the societal impact to every member of a community, but particularly those of a certain race. The other piece to this, in which the legislation this summer did directly address, and I think Chief Riddick alluded to, is cleaning up the statute in terms of when someone can actually have their motor vehicle searched. What we don't know from this incident with the young man is whether the police officer decided there was probable cause, and that's why he searched the motor vehicle, ordered the search of the motor vehicle, or probably more likely, he pulled the person over, possibly for a pretextuous reason, and then said, "Hey, son, you don't mind if I look around in your car while I've got you pulled over, do you?" That's what's called a consent search. And we have banned that under the most recent legislation we passed because we've seen it's used as a tool for racial profiling. I don't have the exact stats for West Hartford in front of me, but in my neighboring community of Fairfield, which is a similar community to West Hartford, it's a town that has, 3% of the public is Black, but Blacks are 4 times more likely to be subjected to searches in that town than white individuals are on a straight numbers basis. It's an out of whack statistic in a number of communities throughout, and I'm not accusing West Hartford of it specifically, but when we look at statewide policy and when we talk about statewide policy, we need to be cognizant of. And so that's why we did clean up the statute this last summer to say, in that motor vehicle search, sure, if you see drug paraphernalia, if you see a gun, sticking out from underneath the seat of the car, if, there's probable cause that some crime has been committed, that person just, fits a description of somebody who just robbed a bank down the street, whatever. Absolutely, go ahead, search the car. You have probable cause to do it. But I smelled drugs from all the way over there, or I pulled you over for a broken tail light, but while I've got you pulled over, you don't mind if I look around, do you? That's the stuff that I think, as we move beyond where we are in policing and try to take it to the next level and address some of the racial and social inequities in policing, we just can't have happen in our state.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Stafstrom. For the audience, I will let you know that we are starting to see your questions come in, and I'm going to hold some of the questions just because I want to make sure we budget time appropriately, and I'll ask them towards the end. I would like to switch to the next video because the next video gives us the opportunity to give an officer's perspective. Just to make sure we have a good balanced discussion here, we will next have an officer's perspective. So if we can load that audio or video.
Yep, I'm going to share my screen so I can get you that video.
And keep the questions coming. I'm going to try to get as many of those on the table as possible.
Okay, this is Officer Amanda Martin, and this is her statement about what it's like to be a police officer in the West Hartford Police Department.
Been with the West Hartford Police Department for 10 years, like I'm going to be 10 years on harvest time. I started out in the patrol division for about 7 years.
It's difficult to hear.
It's difficult to hear. Okay, let me see if I can make it any louder. I have it up as loud as it can go. Let me just check one other thing. Let's see if this is any better.
After the patrol division, I applied to be the school resource officer and went through multiple interviews and got selected by the principal and security director and members of the department to become the SRO at High School, where I've now been for the past 3 years.
Maybe it's just me, but it's not terribly audible.
Okay, I can pause it and see if I can make any improvements to it. Jen Evans, do you have any ideas?
I can try to share it. Let me try see if I can share it from my end.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Officer Amanda Martin.
Much better.
I've been with West Hartford Police Department for 10 years. It's actually going to be 10 years on August 10th. I started out in the patrol division. I was there for about 7 years, where I was a field training officer. Field training officers train the new officers that come into the department. After the patrol division, I applied to be the school resource officer and went through multiple interviews and got selected by the principal and security director and members of the department to become the SRO at Concord High School, where I've now been for the past 3 years. Currently, due to COVID, as you all know, schools are closed, so I've been reassigned to the bicycle unit. So if you see a couple people out riding bikes around, that's me and my partner, Officer Joe Hopkins. My duties and responsibilities at Concord vary on a day-to-day basis, and it depends on what happens during the day. I went through a basic SRO training. It was a week-long training presented by NASRO, and where they talk about the triad of a school resource officer, which is a mentor, a teacher, and a police officer in no particular order. Usually what happens is the school will handle the incident and we try to keep whatever's going on in-house, and they're the ones that usually notify me. I think a lot of people think that the officers are in the school proactively looking to get kids in trouble, and that's absolutely not true. That's not why we're there. The schools are usually required to tell the police department, even if a resource officer wasn't in the school, if I'm not there for the day, they're going to be calling a patrol officer into the school if something happens at the school. I teach classes. I teach a lot of classes on the big trending issues right now are vaping. I'm obviously there for safety, as everyone knows, it's our #1 priority. And then we're there for a mentor. I leave my door open during passing period. I give candy to the kids. Oftentimes my office will be spilling over with kids during the passing periods. I'll go hang out in lunch. I'll drop into gym class. We have various things we do. We wear many hats in the school. So we're not just there to enforce the law. We're there to build bridges with the community, and the bonds that I form there with the principals, the teachers, the staff, and most importantly, the students are beyond none. I really think that SROs in schools are very important in Connecticut, and with Senator Murphy's recent statements, I know that it felt like almost a direct attack on on me as an individual, because I have been there for 3 years and I'm so passionate about it. So those are the basic responsibilities of my day-to-day at Concord High School. One of the last topics I want to talk about is the challenges and considerations that I've personally faced as a police officer in West Hartford during the last few months after the tragedy that happened in Minnesota. As many of you know, a new bill was just passed last week in regards to police accountability. There's, I think, a lot of great things in there, and I think a lot of language that needs to be reevaluated. And me personally, I just feel like sometimes we aren't supported in our community of West Hartford. I do feel like we are supported by the community, but it's really hard as a human to look at the news and see people attacking you as a profession and just painting us with a broad brush. I am not the officer in Minnesota. The people and men and women in this building are not those officers. And here in West Hartford, as you've heard our chief say, we hold ourselves to a higher standard. The last thing I want to leave you with is a quote from Humanize the Badge, which is a social media group. And finally, when this job in humanity has you questioning why you're even doing this, think back to why you started doing it. The reason is the same. You cannot save the world, but what you can do is help one person at a time. That is all you must do. Do that, and yours is a life well lived. Thank you.
Okay, I thought that was a wonderful perspective. And I want to kind of set up a discussion, or at least for comments, Chief Riddick and Representative Stafstrom. I will tell you, in preparation for this, I talked to some people in the community, and it's very interesting. SROs, which the officer talked about, the school resource officers, was something that came up quite a bit. One of the perspectives that I got was the relationship that one of the people I spoke to's children, who was in high school, that they formed with the SRO officer, is something that the family really values. That was a great, the child was struggling with nothing. The child wasn't a problem, but just various different things that happen in high school. That it's good to have people, mentors in school that kind of help you work through that. So we've heard some of those great stories. On the other hand, we've also heard stories where students actually feel slightly intimidated, concerned about having officers in school. So it really ranges a lot of different perspectives. But perhaps Chief Riddick, you could just share kind of your thoughts, your experience, maybe the value or the challenges associated with the SROs. And then I'll come back later with a question or comment regarding the police accountability bill. Okay.
I'd actually like to hear from the rest of the panelists or from the community. My position is strong on the value of SROs, and I think Officer Amanda Martin validated that with her heartfelt presentation. That came from her heart. She's just that type of officer, and she's not the exception to the rule, as we hear sometimes. It's a legitimate vetting process for providing officers for our SRO program. First, they have to go through a selection process here in the police department. We post the position. They submit their qualifications. It's vetted through the command staff. We come up with 3 or 4 names that goes to the respective school. In this case, it would have been Conard, the principal, the security director, and anybody else that the principal decides to question and interview the officer. And then they make their decision out of those 3. We pick officers who are not the big SWAT people. No, we want people in there who are not trying to make arrests, who are just merely trying to have interactions. And as she says, being an instructor, be a mentor, and then all that be combined with being a police officer. The amount of intelligence that we get out of these schools sometimes, that kids might not mention to a quote unquote regular officer, which we're trying to get to the true community policing. We'd like to have that all the time. Sexual assaults, bullying, and other types of abuse occurring in the home. That's the information we get in the schools. We're not there to make arrests. And as I often say, an arrest is a failure, justified or not. So that's the message from the top here at West Hartford PD. And in my former position, my other job was the same message there too. And it's not one uniquely shared by me. There's many chiefs who also espouse that perspective and view.
Okay. All right, Representative Stafstrom, your thoughts, please.
So I think that the chief kind of hit it on the head in that certain communities get this right, certain other communities may not, right? And I think some of that depends on the resources available to a particular community. It depends on the individuals employed by that particular police department and you know, who's available to cover these types of assignments. It depends in some respects on the collective bargaining of or the collective bargaining unit and the contract with the local police union. So in my mind, this should be a local decision. You know, there are certain communities for which school resource officers work, and there may be others where it does not. And that's why when this topic came up and when there was a request to include some sort of provision or reining in or parameters for school resource officers in the police accountability bill, you know, it was our decision as a judiciary committee and as leadership of the judiciary committee not to put anything in this bill on that topic, and that was an intentional decision not to do. There were certainly legislators who wanted to, but I think in my mind, this is best left to local government to decide.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question that came in on this topic is regarding, I guess this is particular to West Hartford, so I'll address it to you, Chief Riddick, is why do we have SROs? I think the question implies that we have SROs in high schools, but not in middle schools or elementary schools. Why do we distinguish the high schools differently from the middle schools and elementary schools?
Well, we have our community relations officers who actually matriculate through the middle schools and even sometimes through the elementary schools. It is correct, they're not stationed there, and that does come down to a resource issue too. So yes, we do have a program. They do go in and they teach, as Amanda mentioned, you know, vaping and worrying about drugs earlier on and just having that conversation and being a safety component. Now, let us not forget how we got here with many of these, actually West Hartford was ahead of the curve, but many other jurisdictions as a result of the school shootings that were occurring. So the SROs were placed in the schools for the protection of the students and the staff. And we lose sight of that sometimes. We just get caught on the, you know, the interactions with the students only. So that's where we're at. You know, we wouldn't mind seeing the program expanded. I know we have the full support of the superintendent of schools, and I don't want to speak for the mayor and the town manager, but I know they support us too regarding this. And, you know, we do it the right way. As you mentioned, we do it the right way. We understand what the need is, and we take care of business, and I'm very proud of our program.
Okay. One more provocative question, if I may, just to expand upon that one, is that question has come up before about how the incident in Sandy Hook inspired many communities to put police officers in the actual schools. But it always strikes me that the Sandy Hook happened at an elementary school, but many of the communities choose to put the police officers in the upper grades. Do you have any thoughts on why we would have chosen the upper grades versus elementary schools as it relates to the Sandy Hook incident?
A lot of the student violence occurs at the high school level. Mm-hmm. A lot of the weapons are at the high school level, older students and the like. So that's part of it too. But don't forget, Columbine was a high school.
Yep.
So.
Fair point. Okay, so now it's sort of going to the other part of the officer's talk or description was really around a little bit. She mentioned the police accountability bill. She certainly indicated that some of the news has sort of put police officers in a disparaging light. So I'm going to kind of combine a question that came in and tee it up for you to give a reflection on the officer's thought, but also this reflection. The person specifically references the U.S. Department of Justice research document 208129 in regards to African Americans. And the study found that African Americans are disproportionately sentenced to harsher punishments, for the same crimes. I think there's much research out there on that. The book, now I'm going off of the question, but just adding to it, the Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, goes deep into statistical data that shows disparities and from anything from being pulled over, to being ticketed, to being arrested, to being sentenced. So kind of combining all of these things, the police accountability bill, I presume, was one effort to try to address this. The question is, was it right? Was it balanced? I know that the officer feels like there's some things that need to be changed. I'm sure Chief Riddick, perhaps I know you have some thoughts on that. And then we'll turn it over to Representative Stafstrom to give his thoughts.
For anyone to deny that there's systemic racism, then I don't know what planet that they come from, especially when it comes to the judicial system and even law enforcement, at the expense of saving us some time. But let's go back to the late 1600s when you have the slave patrols, going forward to the 1800s, Emancipation Proclamation. People forget with the 13th Amendment, there was this section that slavery, it was not slavery for imprisonment, disparate treatment. You have the black laws going forward. For example, if a black man was walking in the street in the evening without identification or something, it's a violation of law. If he didn't have a job, a violation of the black law. If he didn't cross the street and a white person or a white woman was there, a violation of law. So that's systemic. Going forward to Jim Crow, into the civil rights movement, to the 1900s, to the mid 1950s, 1960s. You had 1890, I think, was the voting rights, the original 1890 or 1870, the original Voting Rights Act, except for blacks. And then women had suffrage in 1920, but it wasn't until the 1964 Voting Rights Act that all that stuff was put into place so people can exercise their constitutionally protected rights. And the issue is the unit, the arm, the agent that was used throughout all those centuries was law enforcement as the enforcement mechanism for these segregated laws, these racist laws. So when you hear systemic racism, it's the system. And sometimes people take it as the individual, but it's actually the entire system regarding that. Obviously, we've come a long way. I think I'm a prime example of that, being the first African-American chief in the city of Waterbury. And when I was there, and being the first African-American chief, or any minority chief probably, for West Hartford and actually for Waterbury. So progress has come. For anyone to think, I was born in 1966. So I don't remember a lot of that stuff, but I remember walking to school and seeing a cross that was burnt the night before. I remember being called the N-word numerous times, saying I was in the wrong community as I was walking to school, because we're not like these kids now who take buses and everything else. So I had to walk to school a couple miles, of course, uphill both ways. Representative Stafstrom, give me a little nod for that. Come on.
I was about to sneeze. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to turn my head on you. No.
So I get it. I understand it. But I think we've made progress. We're not nearly as far along as we need to be. And and I'm getting into, I'll stop now because I'll get into our closing remarks with some other stuff. So can't deny it. We're coming a long way. There's progress that's been made. We need to continue on this track.
Okay, thank you. Representative Stafstrom.
Yeah, thanks, Earl. I certainly can't speak nearly as eloquently, articulately, passionately, or personally about systemic racism as the chief just did. So I'm not going to touch that one. But in terms of what the officer said about the bill, I think it's unfortunate, really unfortunate that there are a number of officers around the state of Connecticut, I can't deny this, who consider this bill to be some sort of attack, or, that they aren't supported in this process or anything like that. I think actually that's far from the truth. I think, unfortunately, the timing of when this passed played into both state and national politics to an extent to which there's a lot of fear-mongering, political posturing that has tied into the passage of this bill, and frankly ties into what we see from the president on, his law and order message, and you aren't safe in your suburbs and the like. So not to get overly political about this, I think it's extremely unfortunate that given kind of where we are in the election cycle, the sound bites of what this bill does and doesn't do have dictated the message more so than the actual policy. The officer didn't mention kind of specific provisions of the bill. There's 3, maybe 4 of them that I continue to hear, criticism or concern with out of a 46 section bill that runs 60 some odd pages. I think the vast majority of it is relatively non-controversial. We continue to come back to this consent order issue we talked about earlier, the qualified immunity provision that doesn't take effect for another year, and the use of force policy, which both Senator Winfield and I, as co-chairs of the committee, have committed to continuing to work with post the governing body to reform as we move forward and make sure that provision is not seen as some sort of gotcha, but in fact is a way to beef up training and the expectations we have of officers out in the field. But I guess I will say the counter to that is, yes, this bill was about taking back a little bit of control of policing themselves and giving communities like West Hartford the opportunity to create citizen review boards and giving more divergent voices on the post council that sets regulations and training standards, about giving folks a very, very limited civil cause of action where there's some egregious misconduct committed against them by a police officer. Those were stated goals of this bill to address what I think a number of folks testified before the committee of as a problem in the system. But I think the other thing that's gotten lost in this, and Chief Riddick, I think, rightly touched on this is not just about policing, it's the back end of the system as well. It's what happens when somebody is arrested and the shake they get by prosecutors and others. And that, this particular bill was on the policing side, but over the last several years, the Judiciary Committee and the legislature have looked at a number of those other issues. We've reduced sentences for simple drug offenses. We've reformed the bail system in Connecticut. We've worked on juvenile justice issues. We've created more oversight and transparency into how prosecutors make their decisions. Those are all pieces to this too. So we shouldn't just have this conversation about the police accountability bill or police accountability piece to it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think if we stay on schedule, we have time for one more good question before closing remarks. And I think this is a good one to call out. This question came from someone who specifically references an incident that I'm unfamiliar with in Old Saybrook, in which there was a negative interaction between a community member and someone with a citizen with Down syndrome. The question then gets broadened to ask about policing when it comes in contact with people with special needs, and specifically the question asks about autism. So the question is there training available, and what are some of the things that we can do to sort of protect our citizens who may not be able to articulate as clearly or as typically as other citizens when they come into contact with the police? So this time, since I've been kind of leaning heavily on the police chief, I'm going to go to you, Representative Stafstrom, first.
Yeah, thanks, Earl. I mean, obviously, the social media videos of what happened in Old Saybrook are horrific and seemingly unjustifiable. We're, obviously waiting for, to get all the facts in the full view, and certainly don't want to prejudice the outcome of that investigation. But as often happens with some of these instances, we see a social media video and immediately have a visceral reaction to it. And I think this one is certainly one of those. I think the mental health aspect to policing is frankly one of the most difficult that we face and continue to face. We've done a couple things recently, but I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface. The first is on the task force we set up to look into police accountability, we specifically put two folks who either themselves or work with folks who have mental illness and mental illness challenges that they're trying to overcome. We've also done that on the post council, added someone on the post council, or will be in January, who can speak to those issues as well. And the post council I keep going back to is the governing body who sets training and the minimum standards for police departments around the state. The other key provision in this bill, and I think this is where I'd really welcome Chief Riddick's input, because I know Waterbury has been one of the leaders, and certainly when he was there, is encouraging police departments around the state to look at either contracting with or employing mental health professionals who can accompany police officers on certain types of calls. You know, we've seen it done very effectively in certain communities. It's one of those things, I know, you know, we always hate to talk about the R word, but kind of on a regional basis, if there were, you know, per shift, there was a certain number of social workers available to be on call for police in a particular geographical area around the court system or whatever, I think would be very important as we address these issues, because we simply don't and can't train police officers to be social workers. And in some instances, we're asking too much of a police officer by putting them in a situation that they really shouldn't be in. It should be somebody with some medical training who's actually responding to the situation.
Excellent. Chief Riddick, your thoughts on policing as it relates to the community members that have special needs. And I'll just add one more piece to the question. That the person who asked the question also asked if there is anything she can do as a mother to help with any training, with any interactions, or even help train their children. So I'll add that element for you, Chief Riddick.
Okay, thank you. In West Hartford, we have the care cards, which we publicize, and those who either have people elderly or special needs, we can put their information in our database. So if we're responding to that resident, we'll say it's somebody who's autistic. That information will pop up and populate in our CAD as we're responding, so we can anticipate and expect what's going on. We have approximately 40 to 45 CIT officers, crisis intervention trained officers, and they have special training to deal with folks with special needs. We've also brought it in for autism awareness. We had a instructor come in with our regional training to speak to our officers regarding that. It's important information, specifically if it's a motor vehicle stop, and if we have this information in our CAD system and it pops up on the computer, so the motor vehicle stop, the information comes to individuals in the back seat. We might have the lights on and they're acting up and jumping around in the car. At least we have an idea of what's happening, as opposed to thinking that there might be a violent act occurring or someone trying to secrete drugs or a weapon. So that's extremely helpful regarding the old Saybrook. Obviously, I can't speak on that, but we actually talk about these things at roll call. We have a system called Power DMS, and we run scenarios and training through there, and our officers have to take tests before they can go forward with the training. So, and part of that is the mental health awareness and dealing with the special needs community. So West Hartford has been cutting edge with this for years. I can't take credit for this. This was already in place well before my arrival here. We were extremely cognizant of it, as well as the importance of it. And as far as the training, we're doing our best with our college academy, our citizens academy, our outreach on social media and other places to let folks know that we are on it. We will take any input in health or help that's available. We have the American School for the Deaf just down the road, our interactions with them too. So, we're on it, and we're doing a pretty good job here. We do need more statewide, and as Representative Stafstrom mentioned, other places might have the resources or the time because they're busy with other calls for service, but it is a necessary service that be provided by the police department, so we can prevent violent interactions with that protected class.
All right, thank you. The SRO question seems to be popular here. I'm going to combine two questions that came up on SRO. I guess the officer referenced a comment or some perhaps criticism from Senator Murphy. Our audience members aren't familiar with that, so if one of you have heard of that, the audience members are interested to know more about Senator Murphy's comments on SROs. And then another question came through that implies that SRO training is a 1-week training for SRO officers. If you can give us some more insight into the actual training that happens for SRO officers. Chief Riddick, maybe you can help with both of those questions.
Yeah, well, there is a national, well, I shouldn't say national, there is a movement regarding pulling officers and eliminating the SRO program. I believe Senator Murphy had referenced that. So that was a reference that was made by the officer. She took that personally, and I sort of agree with her. When you have a broad brush of personnel, no matter who the personnel are, not necessarily fair or even accurate. And as I mentioned before, I'm a strong proponent for a properly run SRO program, as we have here in West Hartford. Regarding our training here with SROs, it's specialized training, how to deal with our youth, de-escalation training, mentoring training, teaching to a lesser extent, as well as being a liaison between the students and the faculty in the schools, as well as being aware of indicators for, as I mentioned before, sexual abuse, bullying, and the like, and just understanding what their focus and their role is, that it's really to be a partner and to be a friend, and less to be an officer.
And Representative Stafstrom, thoughts on the Senator Murphy's comments, as well as if you have any insight, and maybe Chief Riddick, you can come back to this as well, about the amount of training that SROs do have or maybe should have.
Yeah, I guess I'll leave it where I left it. I think everybody's entitled to their own opinion. In my personal belief, it should be a local decision.
Okay, excellent. All right, the next question is about the officer made some comments about the bill and certain elements of the bill that could or should be improved. She wasn't specific, so the audience was interested to know what parts of the bill maybe should or could be improved, just to expound on the thought that the officer made, the comment that the officer made. So Representative Stafstrom, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
So I guess I would probably be more interested in hearing what the chief is hearing from his police department in West Hartford. I mean, I know what I've heard statewide. I referenced kind of the 3 or 4 provisions I've heard most frequently on, and can certainly address kind of why we did them and where we're going from here. But I don't want to put the chief on the spot, but if he's willing maybe to tell us, what he's hearing, I could do it that way if that works.
Okay. That's fine. One thing, as a chief, you're always on the spot, so you got to be ready for anything. So to Representative Stafstrom's credit, as well as Senator Winfield, I have been part of other committees, and we've had discussions regarding, there's 4 things we're really looking at: use of force, duty to intervene, consent, and qualified immunity. All 4 of these have been presented already to Representative Stafstrom, as well as Senator Winfield in Judiciary. I think there's an acknowledgement on both sides that there needs to be some work on this, specifically with the use of force language. And I have received, and as you've heard Representative Stafstrom mention a short time ago, he's willing to work with us and clean up that language. The same thing with duty to intervene. There's language in there that, if you become aware of any type of excessive force with no time frame, that you can be held accountable for that and can be subject to an arrest, a felony arrest. And many times the underlying infraction might be a misdemeanor, but the penalty for a failure to report can be a felony, even for something 20, 30, 40 years ago that you may have heard. I don't believe that's legislative intent, but the way it's currently written, that's the way one can perceive that. And again, in our previous conversations with the representative and the senator, there's been an acknowledgement that we need to work on those areas. I think a lot has been made with the qualified immunity, and I think that's more of this shiny object where everyone's like, look at this, but the more important issues are the other three that I had mentioned, specifically regarding the qualified immunity. There's still protection, and as the representative had mentioned earlier, it's only for the egregious acts where this would go forward. I do think there should be some movement on the interlocutory appeal. I think that is important. Without getting too technical, and Representative Stafstrom is an attorney from a very reputable law firm. He can probably explain this a lot better than me. But I just think it's in a way, it's like summary judgment without going through an entire trial if there's no disagreement on the facts by either side, and just a matter of law of whether or not qualified immunity applies. And if it does, you save the family the agony of going through an entire trial, only to find out at the end that the interlocutory appeal is put in place, and to find out that qualified immunity does apply, and you go through that trial for naught. So I think that's something that should be looked on and worked on going forward. So those are the four main issues that we're dealing with now. And I just want to follow up regarding the officers' feelings, and some of what, my personal feelings and other chiefs too. It does sort of feel like we're being attacked and jumped on because of an incident that occurred somewhere else in the country. I don't believe that was the intent of the legislature, but that's the feeling. Just like we had the perspective earlier on the doctor who had talked about that was her feelings, those are some of our feelings. And it's our duty as leadership is to allay some of those fears and have discussions, to have open dialogue and to work on some of these things. So it's a challenge. It really is for our officers to stay motivated, but they put up their right hand and swore an oath, so they have to do their job, and they have been doing their job. But it's real, and we have to work on it collaboratively together, and we can continue to make some progress.
So as I had, hoped for, the chief stole my thunder, which I think is a good thing. I think he's absolutely right that what we need to do from here moving forward is mend some of these broken fences and collaborate and make sure we step back out of the actual bill, step back out of the process, step back out of all of it, and go back to the 30,000-foot level of the intent of this bill, which was to, figure out how we bridge the divide between particularly those communities in our state who have felt policing has been oppressive or heavy-handed or is rigged against them because of the color of their skin. And I get that's not every community in the state. That's, it depends on the community. How we mend that fence and what this bill was intended to accomplish with those police officers who, as the chief said, honorably and nobly serve our communities and put their lives on the line for us every single day. I think, we talk about these same 3 or 4 issues, and I had assumed those were the ones the chief was going to highlight, and I'm glad he did. But there's a lot of other very, very, very good things in this bill, including, just 2 that I want to highlight before I get into the criticisms of it is, what makes it easier for Mayor Cantor and the chief to move to basically fire or decertify a bad police officer, so that an officer with a poor track record is not just no longer on the force in West Hartford, but can't then apply for a job down in Bridgeport, and also is not going to come back months later or whatever. Obviously the bans on chokeholds, there's all sorts of other stuff in here, but also the independent prosecutorial authority is a big piece. With respect to the 3 or 4 provisions we keep coming back to, as the chief said, there's been ongoing dialogue really since before this bill passed, really since even before the public hearing on this bill, when the initial draft was put out with Chief Mello, who in particular, who's the chair of the Post Council and also the Police Chiefs Association on the use of force policy. This has never been intended as a gotcha. Nobody is looking to lock up police officers. That is certainly not the goal of this. The goal is to move more in line with what I believe the federal standard to be in terms of the use of deadly force. And we're waiting on a group of experts from Post to come out with their report and recommendations and trading protocols. And I fully acknowledge that we are going to have to tweak the legislation in order to mesh with that. And that's part of the reason we pushed the enactment date of that section of the bill out until April to allow us the time to go back into session in January and deal with this. On the duty to intervene, certainly I believe having the duty to intervene is necessary. We did see what happened in Minnesota, but I think beyond that, here in our own state of Connecticut, I've certainly heard from a number of police officers who said, gee, I saw something, or there was this incident that was going down on the streets, and I thought to myself, gee, I really should do something. But I was scared to because of the potential blowback and the potential criticism I would get from the guy at the locker, down from me when I'm going to lineup. And what they have said, some of them have said privately to me, is this provision in a way provides some cover, because now it's, look, I'm not putting my skin on the line for you. You effed up. I'm not taking the fall with you. I have an obligation and duty to report. The penalties are significant if I don't. So don't think I'm covering for you. I'm going to report. And this bill provides whistleblower protections and job security protections for those officers who do the right thing and do report instances of when they observe excess use of force. So I think the overall policy of the duty to intervene is absolutely necessary. I agree with the chief that we could probably tighten up the language, and especially as we see how courts interpret it and how it's charged or whatever. But we can round the edge, we can massage the edges, but I think the policy is an important one. Qualified immunity, I think actually the chief said it well, that I think there was an initial, oh my God, this is the sky falling down and the like. And under the first version of the bill, that's probably right. I mean, it would have eliminated any qualified immunity defense in any instance and would have subjected police officers in towns to all sorts of litigation. We took that criticism to heart, and the legislation was significantly reworked. I spent days and days and days trying to negotiate a compromise between, and I'm still getting criticized from folks who don't think this provision of the bill goes nearly far enough as it was actually enacted, as opposed to law enforcement who still has some concerns about it. But I think it's a relatively modest change to the law, and really will only be used in the most egregious instances. I think the one place where maybe of the 4, the chief and I probably have the most disagreement is maybe on the consent search issue. I get, in a way, it can be a useful tool. You probably all seen the political mailers that have gone out. You're making it harder for cops to take guns and drugs and whatever off the street. Is that true? I don't know. All we know is what we hear anecdotally from police officers. You're making us work a little harder. We actually have to get probable cause to search a car as opposed to just asking for it. But we've seen the data nationally and here in Connecticut on just how prevalent the use of consent searches is against predominantly young African-American males versus middle-aged white guys. It is maybe intentionally or unintentionally, a tool for racial profiling. And I think on that one, personally, I'm more likely to dig my heels in and say, I think what we try to do in this bill is strike the right balance. We actually, if somebody volunteers and says, go ahead, search my car, you can go ahead and do it. In Rhode Island, you can't do that. We modeled this legislation a little bit off of the Rhode Island statute, but we definitely toned it down significantly from what Rhode Island and several other states are looking at doing. And I think we struck the right balance on it.
All right, so here I just want to pause just to acknowledge the quality of this conversation. I mean, our two panelists are just ultimate professionals here in explaining to us some of the dynamics that are going on. So I want to pause there and then recognize that we have 15 minutes to go. So I'm going to try to sneak in one more question. I think I'm going to combine a couple of questions into one question. I think because we've had a little bit of this conversation earlier, we can afford to get this in under the 15-minute mark before I ask for some closing remarks. I will tell you that the most popular theme here is around the SROs, and I guess because the police officer raised the question, so I'm going to combine some thoughts here into a question that I'll say this way: is what the cost-benefit analysis for an SRO is the cost-benefit analysis such that it is better to have an SRO to glean some of the information that Chief Riddick discussed, in addition to protecting the people in the building and from people outside the building, to glean some of that information, or is a social worker or other trained professional perhaps a better investment for the result? So I think I'll start with you, Chief Riddick, and then if Representative Stafstrom's had any thoughts, I'd like to get those as well.
First, I think my comments were taken a bit out of context. People are focusing on gleaning information out. That's just one component. I also talked about mentoring. I also talked about the ability to provide teaching and obviously protection. And I don't think you could put a price on a life, and especially our most precious asset, our children. So again, do I think a social worker can do part of the job? Yes. But when the blank hits the fan, you're going to need law enforcement to come anyways. So if you want to do anything, provide additional funding and add a social worker if you'd like. But again, as Representative Stafstrom said, it's a local decision. I'm a strong proponent for SROs in a school when it's done properly. And another, quick mention, we had a DCF worker who was embedded here in West Hartford working with us. Because of COVID, that person was, they had to go back to central office, but they had an office here in our building to assist us with issues in the schools or even in the community. To have that asset here was tremendous. So we get it. We understand it. So again, my position is firm and does not change.
Anything to add, Representative?
Not really, unfortunately.
All right. No, I mean, I think we've talked about that quite a bit. The questions just keep flowing in. The next question, and I must admit it just came in, so I have not prepared well for this one, but I think we do have time for it. Is around panhandling, and I'm not that familiar with it, but apparently West Hartford has a new town campaign in response to panhandling. So without reading the whole question, maybe you guys have some more insight, or Chief Riddick, maybe you have some more insight into whether the panhandling campaign that we have somehow intersects with policing.
Well, I love this topic. If you ask me, this is definitely something that law enforcement should not be involved in. If we want to devote resources, that's the place to devote it to a social worker. Social Services has rolled out a new program, which we are assisting with them locally, providing care cards, providing references to assistance for food, shelter, mental health. But what we're finding is probably 70% of the people we come in contact with don't want the help. The panhandling is very lucrative. There are some making $200 to $300 a day. We had spoke to one individual, a young female, who in a week, and it was a great week for her, was over $1,500. That's incredible numbers. And these individuals, most of them are not from West Hartford, from the surrounding towns, including Newington, Farmington, Hartford, and other areas. So we do have a good program. It's a holistic approach. We know we can't arrest our way out of this, so we're trying to work collaboratively. We are working collaboratively with social services, identifying these individuals with the police officer in plain clothes, trying to provide the care and the resources for them. And for those who do avail themselves of them, we do provide it. But I do believe it's not a law enforcement issue. We should be supplementing, as we are, under the direction of the mayor and the town manager, social services. So I thank them for that support.
Thank you. Anything at a state level, Representative Stafstrom?
I would just say, obviously, it's not just a local issue. You know, the district I represent, Bridgeport, would be very similar to, say, Matt Ritter's district in Hartford, where I represent kind of the west end of Hartford type area, right on the Fairfield line. You know, parts of the district tend to look like any other suburb in the state type of thing, and we have it in my neighborhood too. And I think it's, as the chief said, to some extent, it's a reflection of the economic times. Sometimes there is some mental health issues involved. Similar to what the chief was referencing, we actually have I believe it's DC. I believe it's. I don't think it's DCF. I think it may be DSS officer, employee who rides around with one of our police officers and checks on folks on a regular basis. There's also what's called the State HOT Team, the Homeless Outreach Team, which is a collaboration of folks from various agencies, and at least down in Bridgeport, where we have one of the largest providers of supportive housing in the state. They make their rounds, but oftentimes there's folks for various reasons don't actually want the services, and we can't be arresting someone or throwing somebody in jail just because they don't otherwise want services.
All right, outstanding. So I think we're too close to time for me to fit in any of the other questions. What I'd like to do now is ask for any closing remarks from our panelists. So I'll start with Representative Stafstrom.
I just want to thank you for convening this. I think this is, I've been doing several of these, maybe not in the same format, but in various community, discussing the bill and kind of where we go from here now that the police accountability bill has passed in a number of communities throughout the state. I'll go back to where I started with. I think the leadership of your town in pulling this together, under the direction of your mayor and certainly your police chief, who I think in many respects gets the need for change and modernization, and the bill. We can certainly, agree to work together, or maybe in some cases have minor disagreements as to exact language. But this is the conversation that needs to be happening, I think, in every community around the state.
All right, Chief Riddick.
I want to echo the comments of Representative Stafstrom. I think it's been a good dialogue, an excellent exchange of information. And, going forward, I think we need to continue to educate on both sides. It cannot be lost upon anyone, and I've seen this in my own eyes, the sacrifices of our police officers. I've worked with officers who've been dragged, who've been stabbed, run over by cars. This is the reality of things that do occur, but each and every day we show up to work. In the middle of COVID, our police officers showed up to work and had a decrease in sick time and a decrease in vacation time in the middle of COVID, showing up to work, providing a service for our community, and not just for West Hartford, but obviously law enforcement statewide and nationally. We can't deny reform is necessary and needed. There's no disagreement you're going to find here. I think the process could be just a little better, and I'm confident going forward that we can work together doing that. And for the educational piece, I'm fortunate for now to sit on the post council. We'll see what happens after the first of the year. But one thing we're trying to add to the curriculum is an education on the history of policing, the true history of policing. Unfortunately, what we get from Sir Edmund Peale is not a reality of what many communities of color have experienced, and myself included, regarding that. I think with this education for our police officers, they will understand sometimes why people of color have a certain feeling during an interaction, maybe an exaggerated sense of nervousness during a motor vehicle stop, which I myself have experienced during motor vehicle stops. So I get it. I understand both sides of that. So I think going forward, I like to look at things. I'm an internal optimist. It will get better. It needs to get better. It has to get better. If we continue to work together, listen to each other, and not point fingers at points of divergent opinions and divergent thoughts, and just really have a good exchange of ideas, and have at that exchange, you have the ability for the creation of ideas and new pathways. That's what we need to do. So it's been a pleasure. I thank you, and I look forward to another opportunity to sit before you.
All right, so I just want to close it out by first, I want to thank the audience. This is our first West Hartford Community Conversations. It will not be our last. We are already considering 2 more topics. The next one we're targeting mid-November. 2 of the potential next topics are the school curriculum, about which I have tons of passion, so I'm super excited about that one. As it relates to not being representative, or in some cases not informative, or what other good things that are in our curriculum, and what can we build upon to even make it better. And of course, West Hartford's known for the quality of its schools, so hopefully we'll be at the forefront of the progress that's made on school curriculum. Another topic we're teeing up is healthcare disparities. And I've heard some talks on this that are just profound in terms of how we have gotten to the point that we are today with the disparities we have. Again, a thoughtful conversation that hopefully tees us up for improvement. So thank you, audience, and we're hoping that you will return, and we hope that you enjoyed this certainly as much as I did. I want to thank Mayor Cantor. She has been an advocate and encouraged the organizing committee all along, because we are the type of community that can have these kind of thoughtful conversations that ideally lead us forward and continue to allow us to be at the forefront of progress and change for the better. I want to thank the organizing committee. Again, it took a couple of tries here with weathers and storms, and we weren't perfect on the technical, though we tried, but we're all learning. Unfortunately, we need a few teenagers on our committee to help us along here. But great job, organizing committee. Just the quality of our panelists alone, we could have done this by telephone, and it would have been great, because you guys have just done a wonderful job. I want to thank you. Jennifer Evans from West Hartford Community Interactive is always a great resource for this town that allows us to do programs like this. So thank you, Jennifer, for helping us along. I mean, we wouldn't even be this good with the technology if it were not for Jennifer. And then, of course, for recording this and making this available to the people who weren't able to attend. Jen Matos, thank you for your leadership. The West Hartford African American Social and Cultural Organization just values our partnership with you and the Noah Webster Historical Society. And thank you for what you're doing for the town. This is really informative. Finally, I want to condemn my lighting specialist, because everybody who's on camera just looks great. So I'll adjust my lighting if I ever get this opportunity to again. And then I just want to thank our panelists. I just can't imagine we could have had 2 just more thoughtful, professional, insightful people to help us understand the issues and help us think about how we can take things forward. So thank you so much for the thoughtful discussion, and we'll look forward to doing another one soon. Hopefully I didn't leave anything out, but
I have one quick comment.
Sure.
Our program is the West Hartford Cares Hope Project, dealing with the homeless, with social services and the police department. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that. All right. If there is nothing else, we will sign off. Thank you again, everyone. Wonderful program.
Thank you for joining.